Hello, everyone, and welcome. I realize that there are only a few of us here. At the moment, we had about 30 people sign up, but I appreciate you being on time. And because this is meant to be a very short session, we're going to go ahead and get started on time, and people will trickle in as needed. So, first and foremost, thank you all for being here. My name is Nicole Jackson. I am the founder and principal of Monarch PSG, a social impact organization, and I am also a Path to Positive Communities and Blessed Tomorrow climate ambassador with EcoAmerica. EcoAmerica is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization working to build public support and political resolve for climate solutions by engaging trusted sectors of Americans. Um, and we engage communities far and wide, including faith-based communities, our health communities. So, Path to Positive. Today, we're talking about communities. Is Eco America's program focused on communities? And Eco America is a national initiative of diverse leaders and organizations working to advance smart and local climate solutions. And the goal is to elevate the many benefits of solutions that we bring, and that includes cleaner air, safer neighborhoods, better jobs, and stronger local economies to help residents and civic leaders and just like-minded citizens like yourselves to take action at every level. And in addition to that, I wear a lot of hats in the climate space. I am also the director of education at Center for Engagement, Environmental Justice, and Health, empowering communities. So there's that word again, communities. And I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Octavia Nettles, who will be going through today's presentation with me.
Hello, good evening or good morning, what have you, wherever you are. I just want to do a quick audio check. Can we get a thumbs up, thumbs down? Just to see if everyone can hear me okay?
We can.
Yes. Lovely. Thank you so much. But yes, my name is Octavia Nettles. I am a sustainability and corporate responsibility consultant. And in the spaces that I am in, of course, I am here to speak on climate change and these specific community impacts and how we can always fold our way into the conversation. Additionally, I am on the board of the DC Bird Alliance as the Minister of Birding, which I feel like a lot of times in the green space, when we talk about bird watchers or what birding is, we don't always connect to what that means for our communities. What does it mean to leverage these different spaces and communities? And so that's a little bit about the consulting that I do. And I'm excited to get into today's conversations.
Thank you so much, Octavia. And I do want to take a moment to introduce Alma and have Alma briefly introduce herself. Alma is a colleague of ours as well, and she will be providing support for us today, helping us to manage slides and navigate through any of the tech items that we have. So, Alma, you wanted to introduce yourself really quickly?
Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, well, thank you so much for this space and for being here. I think what you are going to hear is going to be super interesting for you. Nicole and Octavia are one of the greatest professional I have ever had the opportunity to work with, and I am collaborating also with them as a senior fellow from SIG. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you so much, Alma. Appreciate you. And I would love to ask everybody to please introduce themselves in the chat. But as you are doing that, we're going to go to our next slide, Alma. Thank you. So, today's focus, we are going to focus on the connection between climate change and our local communities. Obviously, my local community is different from your local communities, but what we want to do is have a conversation about possible solutions in communities that are local to you. And we'll look at how the impacts are showing up where we live and what that means for the people we serve. We will also talk about the opportunities, how climate solutions can strengthen our neighborhoods, improve health and safety, and build a more vibrant future for everyone. And throughout all of this, we'll explore unique roles that community leaders like all of you can play in helping your cities, towns, and neighborhoods lead the way and chart a path forward. And by the end of the session today, our goal is that you'll feel more equipped and inspired to take some next steps or the first step if you are new to this space, right within your community. So the way that we're going to operate today is Octavia and we are going to um, alternate the information that we are sharing with you. So I'm going to move into the next slide, and then Octavia will move into the next slide as well. So next slide, Alma, thank you. So, and before we dive in, I want to invite everyone, go back for a second, Alma, please. Thank you. I wanted to invite everyone just to take a moment to reflect and think about this particular question as we go through this evening's presentation. So, how have you noticed any climate related impacts that have been affecting your community, and what kinds of local solutions are you most curious to learn about? And feel free to jot down a few ideas. You could share them in the chat, or you could save them for later. But this is something we will talk about a little later. Next slide.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for definitely starting us off and getting us into these reflections, y'all. I will definitely say, depending on where you are, it really does make a difference in the type of climate-related impacts that affects your community. So we would love, love, love to see that in the chat and just, what solutions you're curious about, because that makes the work that we do a bit more targeted and more intentional. So I appreciate y'all for jotting that down and doing all the things. Thank you so much. But let's really get into what's driving climate change. Obviously, this slide is going to focus on the biggest sources that we have in terms of climate change, and hopefully we can really understand the cause that helps us, better understand the solutions that we are creating and cultivating in our spaces and community. So when we are burning these oils, coals, methane gas, it releases the greenhouse gases, which is mainly carbon dioxide, methane, and a couple of others, but we won't get into the chemistry of it all, but we know it's going into the atmosphere. And that really thickens this space, really trapping the heat that the planet emits, and that is becoming a problem across the globe. And the five major sources we have listed here, I do want to highlight that transportation and electricity production, that's pretty much taken up half of these different gases or different greenhouse gases that we have in our atmosphere. And with the way that I'm in the US right now, and so for me, understanding that the certain grid or the certain ways that we are trying to move in the transportation space, like that is really given us a lot of issues overall. And then we understand that these are also being built or having their foundations in communities that are normally underserved. And so, we also have the industry emissions that come from just like burning these fuels through the different materials that we use every day, like steel, aluminum, and concrete. And then when we get into these day-to-day reckonings or people like us that are in the space, our homes and businesses, like when we're burning fuels to heat up our homes and use the grid, or um, lastly, in agriculture, if you are from a more rural space where there is a bit more agriculture going on, you understand what it means to be um, in those spaces, smell those smells that we just associate with those certain cities. And so it's really n- just noteworthy of understanding that the US as a whole emits far more from transportation than the global average, right? While globally, agriculture, like these rural spaces that a lot of us know, are these top contributors around the globe. So I just wanted to start us off with that to just get an understanding of where a lot of these drivers are coming from in terms of climate change. And I'm going to pass it to Nicole, to talk a little bit about just what we are doing currently versus just the overall.
Thanks, Octavia. And just to point out the stats that Octavia shared on the previous slide, those are the five major contributors in the U.S., not across the globe. Okay, so with this slide, what you are actually seeing is an animation. So we now burn 40 times more oil, gas, and coal than we did a century ago, and global temperatures are continuing to rise and will continue to rise until we stop emitting the pollution driving the warming. So this animation is from NASA, and it shows how the planet has warmed since 1880, with the most dramatic increases occurring over just the past few decades within our lifetime. So the last 10 years, you'll see, have been the hottest on record. Next slide.
Yes, and as the planet warms, extreme weather becomes more frequent and intense. Dry areas become drier, and wet areas become wetter, and fueling strong storms, droughts, and wildfires. That's basically what's happening as our planet warms up. And no region is immune. Disasters are striking in unexpected places and seasons. In January 2025, fires like they tore through LA, Los Angeles in the US, and far outside, this is like outside of the fire season. While Hurricane Helene, that caused catastrophic damage in western North Carolina, which is an area that is rarely hit by hurricanes. And weather and climate disasters in the US are becoming more frequent and more intense and more expensive for us. Over the past 20 years, billion-dollar disasters, meaning weather events with at least $1 billion in damage, have surged from an average of three per year to about three per month. And so, really, the frequency and intensity of these events make them harder to recover from, of course, and is impacting more lives, more livelihoods and legacies, and all of our communities nationwide. And I'd like to get into a bit of a sharper scope here, and I'll pass it off to Nikki for the next slide to talk about Prince George's County, Maryland specifically.
Thanks, Octavia. So to be clear, I'm highlighting Maryland because I live in Maryland, but I did want to touch on Prince George's County because that's where I live. And this is happening in our community too, or many of these things. So in Prince George's County, Maryland, where I live, we've seen many of these effects, and our county faces significant climate challenges, primarily driven by increased flooding, extreme heat, and severe weather events. Um, we suffer from, flooding and sea level rise near our county have risen to approximately, zero point 0.5 feet between 1980 and 2029, with an expected increase by 2070 to approximately 2.5 feet, threatening coastal areas, also some of the critical infrastructure that we have here in the county. And we've increased because of increased severe rainstorms, it has caused frequent flash floods. I myself have been a victim of that. Many of us that are in this region, we are not used to having earthquakes. And in 2011, there was an earthquake in the Washington, D.C. Region. And within 2 weeks of having an earthquake, we had a hurricane. And because of that, the foundation cracked on my home. And because of the hurricane, I sustained flooding, um, and significant flooding for several years because I didn't know the foundation was cracked. But these are the types of weather events that we're looking at more and more frequently. And Octavia mentioned about the cost, the impact to local residents. So when we also talk about extreme heat, the region that I live in is experiencing more frequent and intense heat events with projections indicating more than 6 days per year. Um, over 14 more over more than 14 nights. And just recently, this is March, right? We're used to uh coming off of winter, moving right into spring. And just last week we had an 87-degree day here. Like, so it was summer, but it's March. And then we want to talk about infrastructure strain that we've experienced. We have existing stormwater systems and infrastructure that were not designed to handle the increased intensity of current weather disasters, leading to frequent power outages and drainage failures. Um, yeah, just Monday of last week, my neighborhood had power outages. But I am one of the fortunate people. I have solar panels on my house with a battery backup as well. So I did not experience that, but my neighbors certainly did. And then we talk about other environmental hazards, high pollution levels of traffic, one of a major highway in the area, lots of industrial sites, including landfills and incinerators. And, that creates also air quality issues and air quality concerns for those of us that are maybe on the borderline with respiratory illnesses, and specifically regarding ground level ozone and particulate matter. That is a significant um, burden in a lot of the areas in Prince George's County. And then, of course, we can't forget about biodiversity loss, and development and climate stress are causing the decline of native insects, birds, natural habitats all across Prince George's County. So, maybe you felt in your daily routine or have seen the impacts on neighbors or small businesses or city services, but climate change is no longer a distant threat. It's showing up in many ways that matter to our community right now, right here at home. Next slide. And home meaning the US, where we are locally, and I'm sure it's across the globe. Over to you, Octavia.
Thank you so much. And I'm happy that we honestly talked a little bit about shoreline because we are about to talk about the sea level rising. With its 3,190 miles of shoreline, Maryland and its residents are particularly vulnerable to the consequences of sea level rise, right? So this is chronic flooding events, storm surges, erosion, loss of forest and wetlands, and drinking water, along with a lot of the agricultural lands being compromised by salt water. And when we look back, we know that since the 1900s, the global average sea level has risen about 7 to 8 inches. And it's projected to rise another 1 to 8 feet with a likely range of 1 to 4 feet by the 2100s as a result of both past and future emissions from human activity. And what we're closest to is the Chesapeake Bay, and this is the third most vulnerable area in the United States to sea level rise, behind Louisiana and specifically South Florida. The foremost impacts of sea level rising on the state of Maryland include more frequent and severe coastal flood events, which also connects to the tide gauge records that show that sea level in the Chesapeake Bay has been increasing at an average rate of 1.3 to 1.5 inches per decade over the last 100 years, and 50% more than the global historic average observed over the same time period, over the past 100 years. I want to add a couple more stats. Reports from the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Justice and the Maryland Commission on Climate Change projected that sea levels will rise in this state from 1 to 1.6 feet by 2050. And again, we're still using that end day of 2021. The increase could be as much as 4.9 feet in a more serious or extreme scenario. And when we're saying extreme scenarios, we did talk a little bit earlier about these fires or about these hurricanes, and Nicole spoke on having earthquakes in places that don't make sense. Those are all pretty extreme scenarios, especially for how we're facing it on the front end. But just overall, sea level, the the rise of the sea level has caused an increase in tidal floods associated with really nuanced level impacts. Like I said, it really depends on where you are and what you are experiencing, but we can find foundation in the rise of sea levels. And so, nuanced floods are events in which water levels exceed the local threshold set by NOAA, which is the National Weather Service, for their minor impacts. And it's really up to them and their really hard work at documenting and taking research on what is happening in these areas. And truly, these events, they cause damage to infrastructure. They can cause road closures and just overwhelming the different storm drains that may have been put in place in the past, because we are in 2026. And a lot of the infrastructures that are put in place are there because something happened already in the past that caused us to build these infrastructures. And with the rise in shore level and all of the things, it definitely has increased that workload for that initial infrastructure. And just along the Maryland coastlines, the number of tidal flood days, honestly, which is all days exceeding that nuance levels threshold we talked about earlier, it's truly increased. And so that is really another piece that we need to be focused on in these spaces. And I know we talked about the heat and how global warming is happening through the emissions and how we had an 80-degree day the other day. Nicole definitely brought up a good point there, but I do want to pass it back to you to talk about this extreme heat and what that means for everyone here listening. Yeah, Nicole, can you talk to us a little bit about the
Oh, I
summer
apologize.
warnings?
I was on mute.
Can you mute it? Okay,
Yeah.
sorry about that.
All right, thanks. All right, so I was saying that temperatures in Maryland have risen about 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit since the beginning of the 20th century, and temperatures in this century have been warmer than any other period. With the current trajectory of climate pollution, historically unprecedented warming is projected during this century. So, extreme heat is a particular concern for densely populated urban areas where high temperatures and high humidity can cause dangerous health conditions. We think about heat events, have long threatened public health across the United States and are recognized as the top mortality factor significantly contributing to increased hospital admissions for cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, and respiratory disorders. And excessive heat is a leading cause of weather-related deaths in the United States, making spells of deadly heat longer and more frequent. Exposure to extreme heat makes it more difficult for our bodies to cool, resulting in heat-related illnesses, including heat cramps, heat exhaustion, or even fatal medical emergencies such as heat stroke. And then summer heat can also be can worsen air quality by trapping harmful pollutants close to the Earth's surface. These pollutants can exacerbate respiratory health issues in people with asthma or other lung diseases. And as this chart shows the average summer temperature in Baltimore, Maryland, has risen 2.6 degrees Fahrenheit since 1970, which is very significant. Next slide, please.
And truly, with all of this significance, I want everyone on this call to know that if you have been experiencing anything that we've been talking about so far, or you have been tasked to help communities that are going through what we're talking about, we want you to know that you are not alone. So we know that 71% of people in the United States are concerned about climate change, but they only think that about 58% of the people around them feel the same way, when the reality is that over 70% of them do. And 35% of people in the US say that they're very concerned about climate change, but think only 16% around them share that same level of concern. And so the reality is that we think that there's only 16% of other like-minded people out there with us in this country, when in reality there are really over 70% of us that are thinking about it, that are hoping to make change and all the things. So there is a gap in perception. And that can really feel isolating, and it can lead us into despair or potentially inaction. And truly, truly, the good news is that none of us are alone in our climate concern. Nicole, you can go. We'll have the next slide for you. Nicole, if you're talking, I think you may be muted. But this is like a
Yes, thank you so much. Apologies. So Octavia was telling us about, more people care about climate change than we think, based on recent surveys from that were done. And then we're looking at this slide here. Americans agree it's a moral responsibility, and the majorities across varying political affiliations, age groups, and gender all agree that we have a moral responsibility for a safe and healthy environment. Moral grounding for caring for creation is one area where we see widespread agreement, even though, some of the current politics in the United States are such that, we have a lot of climate deniers or people that choose not to want to address it. Uh, we do have more people in agreement about it than we think that we do. And just really quickly, and there is an important underlying concept to keep in mind when it comes to all of these climate harms, systems, laws, policies rooted in racism that mean climate change harms some people more than others, right? And there was an entire EPA, well, is an entire EPA report that outlined these ways that climate change disproportionately impacts communities that are underserved and at least able to prepare for or recover from climate change. Unfortunately, that report is no longer available on EPA website. But if you are interested in seeing that report, it was from 2021. I'd be happy to share an archived version of that report with you. Next slide. Over to you, Octavia.
Thank you. And I'll definitely tune in on getting a archived copy of that report for sure. But again, like she said, you can put in the chat if you want one, or I'm sure that our contact information will be available soon. But moving on, I definitely want to talk about these solutions that Nicole was mentioning where could be rooted in racism. And like we're saying, there are these EPA reports that were out. And so again, we are in the year 2026, which means that these impacts or these types of solutions that we are trying to create may be intentionally put on the side and all of the things, right? And I do want to talk about the solutions that we do have happening now, and those impacts we're seeing today, they reflect about 1.2 degrees Celsius or 2.1 degrees Fahrenheit of warming. So that is our efforts to cool the earth down, and truly every fraction of a degree that we limit or reduce, that all matters. And each step that we take to cut these greenhouse gases and pollutions, it moves us close to a safer, more stable future. And thankfully, the solutions that we need, like clean energy, sustainable transportation, and protecting nature, are pretty much already available. Into the next slide, we are about to talk about how climate change is impacting our lives and what we care about. And we really want to talk about not only just like how are we protecting the planet, but how are we protecting ourselves and really bringing it back to that understanding of community that we talked about earlier in the conversation. And in that, we learned that our spaces are impacted in so many ways by climate change. And for our internal or community perspectives, it can be helpful to categorize these impacts into three major categories. So there's the built environment, there's human health and well-being, and then there's the natural environment. And when we say built environment, we're talking about the systems and infrastructure we rely on in our cities and in our towns. And when it comes to human health and well-being, we are focusing on that physical way that our bodies are impacted by the changing climate, our minds as well, included in that. And those affecting our natural systems, that includes like the changes to our air or the changes to our water. If you're local here, you know that there is a lot of efforts to save us in our water, our land, and the different animals that we have in this beautiful area. And while we do look at these key area, we are just really focusing on the like where is local leadership and how can they make the biggest difference, like protecting this type of health or advancing the knowledge of climate justice. And so moving forward, I do want to talk about or move into Nicole, and she will talk about the shift that we can do in ourselves and in our communities, just in these different spaces to make the impacts that we are looking forward to.
So while we talk about health impacts, we want to take a look, we talk about physical impacts of climate change, are all often recognized, easily recognized, and there's also significant mental health impacts. So the list that you see here is, obviously just a summary, But heat, for instance, is also a mental health stressor. Spikes in prolonged heat can lead to mental health crises and even violence. There have been reports um, that crime increases, causing heat-related aggression when people are experiencing extreme heat instances. And climate anxiety is another, just worrying about, what's yet to come and has, sharply risen in the recent years, especially among children and youth, especially younger generations. Climate anxiety is a big one. And then on the community level, the impacts on mental health are also felt, through decreased social cohesion arising from displacement often, uh, arising from a disrupted sense of belonging, and even just the general strain on society that can fuel interpersonal conflicts. Next slide.
I
So for human health impacts, we want to first look at, that often comes to mind, the impacts of extreme heat. This is actually the number one cause of climate-related illness and death. Higher storms, higher floods, higher fires, right? And climate change is also has an impact on the quality of our air, resulting in higher rates of asthma, allergies, respiratory illnesses, said those already. Climate change reduces water quality and accelerates vector-borne disease within waters. So while diseases like Lyme disease and yellow fever are carried by mosquitoes and ticks and other insects, we have to look at diseases that are born in our water. Uh, I mentioned we live in Prince George's County, Maryland. We have over 200 schools, and more than half of our schools still have lead in the water. So the students aren't able to even partake of using the water fountains in the schools, right? So it compromises food safety and quality due to higher temperatures and severe weather, and higher injuries from extreme weather are also prevalent as well. And climate change also, we already talked about the many ways that it impacts our mental health, but importantly, there are groups um, that have even greater health impacts. We want to make sure that we're looking out for those in our communities with diminished capacity, diminished immunity, uh, the communities that are, less mobile or disabled, and members of our communities with pre-existing conditions are always the most impacted. And of course, our seniors and young people. Next slide. Over to you, Octavia.
Thank you. And as we've mentioned before, climate change, it definitely impacts our water quality and water availability. It is truly disrupting the delicate balance between evaporation and precipitation, which results in both floods and droughts, and sometimes strangely in the same location, as happened last year in California, which is also called hydroclimate whiplash. So basically, they experience floods and droughts in the same area. And a lot of our lower quality water that also like comes from algae blooms and red tides that are linked to higher temperatures or storm runoff that will contaminate these specific areas. And in the next slide, as we're talking about these specific areas or these really vulnerable populations, we're talking about climate change, and this will exacerbate the existing vulnerabilities. And this is because of historical and persistent injustices, including structural and systemic racism, income differences, limited access to resources, and many other factors, including even where a person lives. In the United States, there's more, I would say the vulnerable communities are largely people of color or immigrants, low-income communities, young people, pregnant people, or childbearing people, people living with disabilities, and people for whom English is not their native language, just to name a handful. And as time goes on, these groups will continue to suffer the worst impacts of climate change, unless we recognize that the impacts are linked to this inequity, and that they are also linked to the way that we can show up and the way that we act to restore this type of justice. And in the next slide, we're really getting into the impacts, right? So how climate change is already affecting our communities, our congressions, and the people who we care about the most, right? Like we've already talked about a lot of these impacts. And so I want to change gears and get into the solutions where the problem is very simple. As we burn oil, gas, and coal, we destroy nature, right? And so what is our solution to stop burning fossil fuels and restore the natural world? And really, in order to slow this down or to stop climate change, we are looking to switch to clean energy and use our resources wisely and intentionally, and hopefully to restore nature, to heal these ecosystems, and to clean our air and our water. And since we are using carbon so much, there is ways for us to harvest that from our atmosphere, what we're breathing in and out right now. And there are, in the next slide, three necessary principles for climate change. Um, and we definitely are focusing into this as we are transitioning into clean energy, right? So there's justice, which are the solutions that we create must also benefit the communities most impacted, not come at their expenses, right? Hopefully, we are being ambitious and settling in our ambition by setting bold and immediate goals to significantly reduce emissions fast. I mean, within years, not decades, because in the earlier stats, we learned that we really are running out of time. And in the mix of all of this, we are hopefully focusing on restoration and just taking care of our natural world by protecting and rejuvenating the land and the water. And with these principles in mind, I am going to pass it off to Nicole to talk a bit about what success looks like.
So, the big picture here. So, to stop climate change, we need to focus on four key goals. Limit warming. So, world leaders have agreed to a goal to keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius in an effort, the UN called the Paris Agreement, right? The UN Paris Agreement. Despite recent US political decisions, such as the withdrawal from the agreement, many states and local governments continue to uphold the targets. We want to look at reducing emissions. So to limit the warming, the U.S. has previously set a goal to cut climate pollution by half by 2030, not by half, in half by 2030, and reach net zero by 2050. So, for example, organization called America's All In is a coalition of cities, states, and businesses, and it's driving clean energy adoption and emission reductions to uphold the Paris Agreement despite shifting federal policy. So that's one of the things we want to make sure we're looking at. How can we continue to affect change despite what's going on at the federal level? And then we want to look at, how we're building resilience. We need stronger infrastructure and disaster recovery plans to handle extreme weather. And we need accessible resilience hubs to provide care, connection, and shelter to people when extreme weather instances strike. And then finally, we want to look at restoring nature. So that looks like our forests and our wetlands and our coastal ecosystems all absorb carbon and protect our environment. So over the next few years, it's going to be crucial, even with current challenges, as you know, past investment and progress are making a difference. Next slide, Alma. Back to you, Octavia.
Thank you. And y'all, according to Deloitte's research, right? They really did reveal that an action on climate change could cost the world's economy 178 trillion US dollars in less than 50 years in 2027. And so reaching these goals won't just stop climate change. It will also improve everyone's lives. Climate solutions that we've mentioned before, we know that they already exist and they come with huge benefits. By switching to clean energy, for example, and restoring lands and water, we protect the environment and the wild and our wildlife, which is really our big goal. And cleaner air and cleaner water creates healthier people and healthier communities. Lower cost in energy means saving for these families and for these benefits. And as we are reducing our dependence on fossil fuels, we are reducing just overall global conflicts and we're making our economy a bit more secure. And as we're talking about the economy, like a clean energy economy, this creates jobs and it just boosts the whole cycle of the economy and the money that we are able to create and use in our country. In fact, it could bring $43 trillion in global benefits by 2070. So in these 50 years, we could have this much more, but most importantly, these solutions, they build stronger, healthier communities that will help be foundational for a better future for everyone. And reaching these goals overall, as we're moving into the next slide, I mean, we're already on our way. We have an an amazing investment in clean energy, which is driving just absolute rapid growth. The climate lawsuits that we have, we're holding these governments and corporations accountable. Um, a couple of recent legal victories, including youth-led cases in the U.S., like Youth versus Montana, are setting powerful precedents for the right to a healthy environment. Our corporations are also stepping up. 66% of Fortune 500 companies have made major climate commitments, and it is paying off. On average, companies that consistently cut their emissions earn nearly 1 billion more in profit per year than those who didn't. And when federal action wanes, state and local efforts keep climate progress moving. Currently, we have 45 states, correct me if I'm wrong, that have developed climate action plans to reduce greenhouse emissions. And in 2024, nearly every state took some sort of action, whether that's passing new laws, updating incentives, or adjusting the electricity pricing. And they're doing all of this to influence how solar energy is used and compensated. So we've been moving in the right direction, which is great. And I hope that we can keep this momentum that we have going and maintain it in a way that makes sense. And I'll pass it over to Nicole to talk a little bit about our different solutions too.
So we want to, we can make a difference. Look at how, you know, we can make a difference in many ways by living our values to protect our family, friends, neighborhoods, and communities. And what can we do in our homes, our workplaces, even our places of worship, and just the community and broader communities where we live, work, and play, right? So everything you do helps. So what do you uh, or what can you do and when you can? Uh, like when can you do it, right? So next slide, Alma. I want to take a look at like what we can do at home. So things that we could do at home while we need action at the system. Um, we know actions at the systems, the policies, and the institution levels are actions that we can also take at home. So most of them are doubly beneficial, also saving us money while reducing our impact. So whether you own your home or you're a renter, um, pardon me, focusing on energy conservation and efficiency and waste reduction can help be as much as 30% of the solution, and they are fairly easy to implement. Uh, Converting to electric and using renewable energy sources is ultimately how we'll be able to quit fossil fuels. Our transportation and food choices are also really significant when trying to lower household carbon emissions. And we want to look at the restoration of local ecology and how that can we can even more reverse climate change and mitigate impacts like heat, flood, and drought. But it's important to remember that we can have our biggest impact when we come together um, and do things, act collectively to solve some of the challenges we face. So community is really important. And then when we talk about what we can do at work, there's a lot of opportunity to do this in our workplaces as well, to make your workplace more climate friendly. Start by inviting colleagues, volunteers, and stakeholders into discussions about what should be done and why. I know in, my previous workplace, I implemented a compost program first within my organization and then within a year, the entire building where I work, we were doing building-wide composting. Um, so climate should, be a part of the mission of the organization or whatever company you work with. Schedule lunches to, dive into how making challenges can benefit the work that you do, making changes, pardon me. And it's okay to start small, easy wins like changing out lighting to whether it's LEDs or, compact fluorescents or whatever, motion sensors, changing thermostats. Every little bit helps. And you can also ask your employers, to support things like public transportation benefits if they don't have them, bike to work incentives, plant-based food options, as well as waste reduction that can help workers make positive climate decisions. And just there are many others, but to move on, we want to look at some renewable energy sources. Next slide, Alma. Thank you. So after we've reduced, how much energy we're using, it's critically important that we expand the amount of renewable energy that we're producing. So we want to look at wind and solar, by far are the best known choices, but we do recognize that sometimes those options can be cost prohibitive. And then they're large scale utility projects. So medium-sized community projects or small um, rooftop options. There is an apartment complex near where I live, and uh, they provide solar power to their renters. They have taken their car park, what is it, the parking lot, sorry, they're taking their parking lot, and they have installed a covered car park with all what is it, solar panels. So they have sort of like a mini solar farm at the apartment complex just down the road from me. I think that's very cool. There are things like rooftop solar, especially if you're a renter. There are panels that you can use. There also, one of the things that I saw recently was individual solar panels that people can put on their balconies if you have that. And then, of course, you want to get the support and advocate of, your local advocacy community. So you talk to your local businessmen, uh, different apartment complexes that may be your neighbors, and workplaces are all great candidates for things like solar power. Next slide, Alma. And then lastly, we want to take a look at clean transportation. So when it comes to transportation, there's an enormous potential there. We saw several slides back to reduce CO2 emissions in the United States, and cities and governments and local governments have really significant role to play in helping us to reduce those emissions, especially when it comes to transportation. Some of the things that they can do include building and expanding and electrifying robust public transit systems that are accessible to all residents, uh, running vehicles on clean energy. And, they can ensure safe and accessible routes for active transportation, like protected lanes, dedicated paths for bikes and trails, or better sidewalks. Make sure the sidewalk infrastructure is good and accessible for people to walk on, and then implement car-free zones. And they can provide infrastructure like charging stations, carpool lanes, and even incentives for switching to electric transit. So your local advocacy is essential in making these things a reality. And additionally, your transportation choices are significant. So minimizing air travel, it's a tough one for me. I love to travel. Minimizing air travel and maximizing the use of public transportation make a big difference. And in rural areas or places where public transportation is limited, electric vehicles are often a better option and increasingly becoming far more affordable. Back to you, Octavia.
Thank you. And yeah, I think that it's important for us to highlight that cities can also lead the different climate solutions, right? We can go from setting high efficiency standards to upgrading infrastructure or incentivizing just different retrofits of their area in cities. And then the next slide, I think it's important for us to have an understanding that our trees, um, they play an important part in our community by helping control air and water pollution, by reducing heat and cooling costs, and making our communities beautiful at the end of the day. I do also want to talk about farming because we have a profound opportunity to help reduce climate change and pollution through innovations in the way that we farm on a larger scale. So we know that a lot of our food sources come from our farmers, and hopefully everyone is shopping hyper local. But outside of that, when it comes to things outside of our control, right? So when it comes to disaster preparedness, and we know that living with the reality of climate change, that means that we need to adapt to our emergency response services and prepare for disasters, right? So in the next slide, you can see that this can include different type of neighborhood and household readiness. That includes, like, we can go through government planning and then also just the overall community responses if we're working together. And as we're working toward this idea of climate justice, in the next slide, I do want to highlight that we really want to be sure that we understand that everyone has their own way of getting into climate justice. This really means many things to many people, but at its core, right? We are recognizing that those who are disproportionately impacted by climate change tend to not be the most responsible for causing it, right? So I do want to go back into what we're our kind of state of choice for tonight, which is Maryland. In the next slide, I want to talk about how 82% of Maryland adults support the funding research into renewable energy sources, and 78% support the regulation of carbon dioxide or CO2 as a pollutant. And in 2022, I'm pretty sure that Maryland's legislator enacted a separate law to further reduce the state's greenhouse gases emissions to 60% below the 2006 levels by 2031. And that is around the corner if you haven't checked that. And we're hoping to also reach a net zero emission levels by 2045. Specifically, when it comes to our nature-based solutions, according to the Nature Conservancy, Maryland has the potential to reduce their carbon emissions by 5 million tons, y'all, tons, tons per year through natural solutions. And so we definitely have what it takes to get these things done. In the next slide, we also know that there are major like institutional changes that are needed to make these solutions possible, accessible, scalable, and equitable. And we can and should do everything we can to protect our climate and care for our communities, but we know that we need those in power to take actions too. And in the next slide, I do want to highlight that there is a true spectrum of advocacy and how you can engage. I do want to pass it to Nicole to speak on this, though, a little bit more.
Thanks, Octavia. So we know that 71% of Americans are concerned about climate change, including nearly 40% being very concerned. But at the same time, only 16% of people think those around them are very concerned. This perceived gap is in concern can be closed by talking about climate change, connecting it with our common values and providing opportunities to do something about it, right? We often hear do, like, what can we do? There's lots that we can do. And this includes a spectrum of audiences from friends, family, our congregations, professionals, local communities, so governments, businesses, educations, corporations, polluters, and of course, policymakers. And climate advocacy involves a spectrum of activities appropriate for any level of advocate, whether you are seasoned and an expert in the space or just getting started. So we want to make an impact where we can act together. So if we look at some ways to advocate, next slide, Alma. We want to look at uh, different things that we can do. I want to open the floor up for discussion. So, where I live, um, I write testimony. I give oral testimony at, local either planning commissions or county council um, meetings or the state general assembly. So there are groups that you could check and become a part of and become coalition members that can help you with your advocacy skills. You can reach out to your local officials if you don't think you have the skills to write letters about different legislation or bills that are coming on the floor that may impact climate change in your area. You can always call them and call their offices. There has been a legislator that has told me that oftentimes if they get 6 calls or emails or notes from people, just 6, then they know that it's an issue coming down the pipeline. And why 6? Because, one is, someone out there complaining. 2, it's like, oh, it's a little bit here. But once you reach 6, they anticipate that more people will follow. So they know that certain things are an issue. And just remember, like, we voted these people in, so it's our opportunity to be able to um, hold them accountable for some of the things that we want to do. I want to open the conversation up to some of you. We are 7 minutes over, but I do want to offer the opportunity to ask if you have any questions or if you would like to talk about some of the solutions that are happening within your community. Thank you very much for joining us. I see in the chat someone said they have to pop out. I do appreciate you being here. All right. So if there are no questions, oh, go ahead, Miss Barbara. Thank you.
Everything that you basically said tonight is what I'm experiencing and what I'm going through. And I kind of walked away and shifted my role, I'll say, because I took on treasurer role and someone else kind of took on the presidential role. I'm now back in the presidential role. And just in the last 3 months, I have saw more action than I've saw in the last 4 years as to getting us what we need. And with the tool you just said, you don't realize how important 6 calls is. When I first started and I made all my complaints to MDQ, which is our environmental protection people here, it was like, well, Miss Barbara, you're the only one complaining, so we're not going to do anything about it. So what I did was I took notes and put them on everybody's car windshield, stuck them in their door, whoever I could find on this end of my subdivision. And from that point, it's grown. And now people won't come and attend meetings, but they will give you that call. They'll make that call for you, or they'll come to your house and they will do an interview for a story. But through this, we are now to where I feel as though we are going to see some major action for our neighborhood. And thank you, Nicole, because you've been a part of it.
Thank you,
And
Miss Barbara.
Octavia.
Appreciate you so much and all that you have been doing in the effort to reduce climate change. So on that note, it is 7:39. I do appreciate everyone for being here. We will share this recording on our YouTube channel for those of us that missed it today. But I do have the final thoughts in the chat that I want you to think about. Think about one thing that you've taken away from today. How can we make this presentation more useful? And then what's one action that you can take personally to do right away? And how can we take action together as a group? So, with that being said, I want to thank Octavia and Alma for being here with me today, and thank you all for being here.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Good
Good
night.
night. Good night.